Next, what we're going to look at is some of the ungodly effects of fear in our life. And we're going to see what fear does. You see, a lot of times we embrace things that are destructive in our lives. People embrace fear and believe that it helps them. It makes them stronger. They use other words for it. Well, somebody has to be responsible. Someone has to think about these things, and the anxiety and the worry that they allow to operate in their lives can have really destructive impact. I know I'll share part of the story in our family. My son had illness. He had asthma, which is tied often to generational fear and anxiety. The very day that we learned some of the keys of spiritual roots to infirmity, we had been seeing people healed of many different things, and I had come home from laying hands on people, praying for people, operating in as many keys as I understood at the time, and seeing people healed. And I'd come home, pray over my son, anoint him, stay up all night, fast for him, and I'd be giving him breathing treatments. Wasn't seeing healing in his life. The day we began to understand some of the spiritual roots of infirmity, my wife was convicted as she read the spiritual roots to asthma, and she thought she had never really many times confessed that she struggled with fear. It was strong in her life, and it was strong in her upbringing, and she had operated in it, but she had come to give it other names, talked about it as being, well, somebody has to think about these things and have to be responsible, and many different words for it that sounded much better than I'm being anxious, I'm being fearful, I am worrying. But that day, recognizing that there was a possibility that her issues could be impacting our son, she repented of the fear. Fear didn't disappear overnight. She wasn't delivered of all fear that day, but she confessed it, repented of it, renounced her agreement with it, began to ask God to set her free from it, and prayed over my son that connection between she and my son, that her fear was impacting him. We call it a soul tie, but the scriptures talk about our souls being knit together with people and being bound to one another. They had a strong bond, a strong connection, and she asked God to break the unhealthy components of that day. That very day, my son was healed of his asthma. What are some of these effects? We're going to look at several from Scripture, and then some from a physiological understanding, straight out of medical journals, straight out of stuff that anybody can find. First of all, fear can paralyze us from doing God's will. 1 Samuel 17, the entire army of Israel would flee from battle with the Philistines because of Goliath. Fear paralyzed them, had them cowering, hiding in the clefts of the rock, because they were afraid of one man and his challenge. How many times have you been paralyzed with fear? I know one of my tactics, I love to play sports, one of the things I love to do. I know I'm probably past my age for being able to do these things, but I do them anyways. Ultimate Frisbee. Just have a blast doing it. And sometimes when someone's getting close to catching a Frisbee, I'll come running in. Okay, I'm showing my competitive side. And I'll just start yelling. And some people, that's enough to intimidate them. And yet there's others. And that fear will cause them to flinch or something, and they'll miss the Frisbee. Typically, an athlete who's seasoned doesn't even get phased for it. If anything, they might brace for impact or whatever, feeling like someone's about to crush into them. But it doesn't phase their ability to concentrate. And so fear for some paralyzes them, keeping them from moving forward, and yet others, it only heightens their sense of concentration and strengthens them. But for many, in fact most, it paralyzes them. Look at a whole army, and then there's one little boy who knows his God, who faces that giant. Fear can cause courage to disappear. In Joshua 5:1 says, when the people heard all the great things that God did for Israel, it says that their hearts melted. Joshua 5:1, it says that the hearts of all the people around, when they heard the great things God had done, their hearts melted. Courage is what that word hearts melted, it's what it's talking about. Their courage vanished. It went away. They had no will left to fight. It's one of the tactics in many battles is to come in with such overwhelming force that you scare the enemy into submission and retreat and surrender. And when you use overwhelming force, people just give up the battle. Satan, it says, is like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And one of the most powerful tactics he has is when he just roars really loud. And I don't mean sounding like a lion, but he comes across like he's something big and bad. And one little incident in a church that can seem like a blow up, all of a sudden that church operates out of fear. Fear maybe of spiritual gifts, or fear of praying with authority and commanding unclean spirits to go, or fear of this or fear of that. Fear of so many things keep us paralyzed. Fear is the root of worry and anxiety. Fear is that root that leads us to worry, anxiety, which produce nothing positive. There's no healthy fruit from worry and anxiety. It just affects your body. We're going to see that physiologically. It affects your ability to think. It affects your ability to do something bold and courageous, to walk in obedience to God. Fear can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Often what we fear the most has a greater likelihood to occur as a result of the fact of our fears. Job 3:25 says, "For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me." All these things that happened to Job, he was afraid of them. And you can see it operating in his life. He used to make an incredible number of sacrifices for his children, just in case somehow something had been overlooked in their life and some sin had not been dealt with. He wanted to make sure. So he would offer more and more sacrifices for his children. It just shows the fear that was operating. And look at all the destruction that came. Now, I'm not suggesting this is the answer for why things happened to Job. I'm suggesting it as both scriptural in its foundation and having some degree of possible impact, okay? Because when all of his friends tried to bring fear up in his life and different things, God rebuked them. And God, when Job asked a long list of questions, didn't answer all the whys. This doesn't answer all the whys, but it does just illustrate something that is so powerful. Oftentimes the things we fear, that fear causes that to become reality. The thing that we fear becomes our reality because of fear. So we want to see that stop. Faith produces positive results. Fear produces negative results. As a result, fear sometimes proves true and reinforces itself. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes when we fear something so much, we create the environment where our fear becomes the reality, thus reinforcing our fear. So fear only deepens and strengthens. It's a similar way that rejection operates. Someone fears people are going to reject them, and they begin to push people away. And when people get the message and turn away, they're like, see, proves my point. They were going to reject me just like everybody else, when that person was possibly and likely really reaching out for a relationship. But that rejection, same way fear. Fear causes us to operate. I've watched fear in paintball. And all these illustrations are landing with the guys, but maybe not with the girls. But and with girls, if you've played paintball, oftentimes it's the people that operate in fear, hiding a lot. They're not going to take out any of the enemy. They will eventually be killed. They might live in the game just a little bit longer, but not usually. They're not going to make it for long. The more fear we operate, the less effect we have on the enemy. I know the way I play the game is to outflank the enemy from the very beginning of the game. Very likely, I could go early, but more than likely, I'm going to take out way more of the enemy than anybody else or the others that are flanking like myself. We're going to do the most damage to the enemy. Again, I'm playing just a game, but it takes that kind of warfare in order to see victories won in our lives spiritually. Fear brings pain. It brings physical pain. It says in Psalm 48:6, fear took hold of them there, and pain as of a woman in birth pangs. I know myself, when I've given into fear, ungodly amounts of fear, my stomach hurts, my chest hurts, and I recognize, God, I got to bring this to you. Show me how to walk this out, because I am so afraid. Where it's impacted me the most sometimes is some relationships that have been very painful, and to be in that relationship and to re-engage with that person on a level that needs to be dealt with, it can be really fearful because of the feelings of rejection, the feelings of other feelings that just come in that have so much power just to hurt and to wound, and the fear of experiencing that pain again causes pain. So fear causes heart problems. This is straight out of Scripture, Isaiah 21:4. My heart wavered, fearfulness frightened me. The night for which I longed, he turned into fear for me. In Luke 21:26, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the power of the heavens will be shaken. You see, fear impacts our heart. I told you I felt pain in my chest, pain in my heart because of fear. So we're going to look at some more things straight out of medical research. Physiology of fear, the physiology of fear. What is that? It's the study of the impact of fear on our body. Okay, this is simple but vital explanation of what is taking place as a result of fear. Let me illustrate this. There was a woman, she weighed 74 pounds, and she called our ministry, and I ended up talking with her. 74-pound adult female woman. She wasn't bulimic or anorexic. Here was what she shared with me. She was in an office in a business in Tampa, didn't live more than 1 mile from her house, or didn't work 1 mile from her house, lived within a mile of her office. And every day she had so much secretion of mucus that she would spend the day working, but having to cough up mucus plugs, very thick mucus plugs, and had constriction of the airways, different things like that. This is all she told me. And here was my first question. How long have you been dealing with severe anxiety and panic in your life? And she goes, oh wow, almost all my life. Didn't stop for 1 second, didn't ask me, how did you know that? Why did you ask that? She just began to tell me some of her story and some of the fear. It was so powerful, her panic attacks, when she would go more than 1 mile from her office or her home, that she would have panic attacks so severe that she would often get arrested and have to be sedated and taken to a hospital because of the panic and anxiety that she had. Unfortunately, this woman didn't come in for ministry and kind of closed that door of receptivity to ministry. I believe very well that we could have seen miraculous breakthrough in her life, because we've seen God heal people where that root of what they were dealing with was anxiety and fear before. And this is how destructive fear can be in our bodies. Well, I want to look momentarily at the endocrine system. I would encourage you, whether you're listening to this or watching the DVD or watching this online, that you print out the notes and check some of this out. All right? We've got beautiful illustrations downloaded right off the web and pictures of the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is a system of glands that are involved in release of extracellular signaling molecules known as hormones. So endocrine diseases are diseases that come from either the oversecretion of hormones from these glands or an undersecretion. Men and women have these hormones in several different glands in different parts of their body. And these glands all working together with the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, according to Wikipedia, is the portion of our brain that contains a number of small nuclei with a variety of functions. One of the most important functions of the hypothalamus is to link to the nervous system, to the endocrine system via the pituitary gland. So you've got the endocrine system and the nervous system linking via the pituitary gland, the hypophysis. Okay, these are not words I usually deal with, all right? So just bear with me. But what happens is our thoughts are run through our hypothalamus to our pituitary gland, which sends the signals to our endocrine system of what hormones to send into our system. So when you're walking on a train track and you hear the horn coming, all of a sudden your hypothalamus takes, there's a train coming. I'm on the tracks. I better get off the tracks. And it sends to your body the necessary signals so that you got the extra adrenaline to get up and move. People that have been hurt and wounded, when they recognize the danger they're in, have found extra supernatural strength to move, and that's the hormones operating, the adrenaline kicking in. I remember playing football one time. I broke a finger in my hand, and I was playing with a bunch of high schoolers. I was about college age, and some of us in college and some of us were in high school, and I was a house parent at the time, and I'm thinking, if I walk off the field after the first play of the game, they're going to think I'm a wimp. My hand hurts like it has never hurt before, and but I'm going to get up and I'm going to keep playing. I played the entire game. I quarterbacked some, I received some, and but when I was walking off the field, the adrenaline was gone, and the pain in my hand was so great. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I sat there holding it in the air. It was the most excruciating pain. Like when you stub your toe, that pain is intense. When you stub it really bad, and you want to punch a hole in the wall. Okay, maybe I don't have that violent of a streak. I'm just telling you, that's what I feel like. Sometimes when the pain is so great, well, I'm sitting there going, this tops anything I have felt before. It was so excruciating. And I took pain medicine, and I was still just excruciating pain from a broken bone in my hand. Why was it that I could play that football game knowing that I had done something pretty serious to my hand? It was because of the adrenaline rushing through my system. There are things that we can do that we're not meant to operate on that level of adrenaline all the time. We're not meant to operate on some of the hormones that our body secretes all the time. Histamines are secreted when we walk in anxiety and fear. And so when we have an oversecretion of histamines, the doctor prescribes an antihistamine. I could hear you. We know that. That's what you take. And yet, what if we dealt with the root cause and your body stopped secreting those histamines? Your anxiety went away. The histamines stopped being secreted. You don't have to take the pills anymore. Do you get it? So this is the way that our thoughts affect us. Our thoughts can kill us. If there are people that operate in fear all day long, it's so normal to them that they're not even aware or can recognize it. Oh no, did I wash my hands after I touched that door? I shook somebody's hands. I need to go wash my hands. Oh my goodness, are the doors locked? They can think about things like, there's 2 entrances into this office. How can I be sure I protect myself from both angles if something were to happen? Some of us are going, that's weird. But for some of you are going, that's exactly how I think. How does he know that? We've dealt with so many different people with so many different types of fear. One woman leads women's Bible studies in her city, and attractive young pastor's wife, fruitful ministry, just very gracious, attractive woman, easy to relate to, began to describe the amount of fear that she experienced. She said, when we lift up the toilet seat, I'm afraid I'm going to see a head floating in the toilet. When I open up the trunk, I'm afraid there's going to be a body there, because of the horror movies she watched as a kid. Other people, so many different types of fears, anxieties, and worries. Remember somebody that was working with us one day. We had such a minor incident occur, and I jokingly said, I need you to come to the principal's office. Oh my goodness, that was one of the worst things I could say to this person. I don't think I've ever said it to anyone again since that time, and wouldn't think about saying it again. But it just sent this person into a major tailspin. They've been operating with our organization, getting ministry and healing, but also learning to do ministry until this incident. And it dredged up so many fears from other leaders in their life that had been abusive, that the fear that I was going to mistreat them in the same way caused them to take many steps back. And I'm glad to report that today this person is not dealing with that issue, works alongside our ministry in wonderful ways. And yet, that's how powerful fear can be to affect our lives, to affect our bodies, to affect our spirit, our souls, and our relationship. Fear was designed to produce these chemical reactions in us. And there's healthy reactions that God intended. But when we respond to these dangers that aren't existing, or we're expecting something that isn't there, it can be unhealthy. So medically, the response to that is to give us drugs to counteract the effect. I was with some doctors. They had traveled with us to Africa. I began explaining some of these things, and the spirit, soul, and body connection, and how that we would treat things by dealing with the spiritual roots, and how medically you could treat the same thing dealing with it medically, but you're never going to deal with the root, and the issue is going to continue, and you're going to have to continue to take medicine. But if you deal with the root cause, doctors that came with us on this trip pulled me aside and said, "Richard, we got to talk with you." I was thinking, uh-oh, here it comes. I'm not ready to debate people on that level. Don't have degrees medically, but we're seeing people healed all the time. But this is what they said: "Richard, everything you say makes sense with what we know from our study. And we don't understand why what we do is just give someone pills to deal with the counteraction, when we know from research, medical research, some of those root issues. But nobody has a pill for fear. Nobody has a pill for anxiety." Well, they do, but they're not nearly as effective as God's power at delivering us, at setting us free, at healing us of these things. Then there's natural healing. And there are many who practice natural healing, and such as the use of herbs in order to bring balance into our hormonal state. And that stuff can be really helpful and really beneficial. And I encourage, we use some even at our house. And yet I know that many times it's dealing with those root issues. I also want to encourage you and say that what we believe, although it's not our strength, is that it's hand in hand together. What we eat has as much ability to destroy us as these things like fear, bitterness, rage, all different types of things, self-hatred, self-rejection, has the same amount of power. And healing can come from either, or it can come from both. I've seen people deal with their spiritual roots, and the day they got rid of certain things in their diet, they were healed. This had only brought a measure of healing. I've seen the reverse be true. People that have eaten perfect biblical diet, nothing but raw fruits and vegetables, juicing all the time, no healing until they deal with the spiritual root. So I believe it goes hand in hand. Our strength right now is in dealing with the spiritual roots, but we believe that God is calling us to be completely holistic in our approach, and I believe that'll be a part even of our website one day. In fact, as you're listening to this, it may already be a part. But we really believe in that. And next, spiritual healing. If fear is the root cause, that's kind of what we've been talking about, is the spiritual healing. Then if you don't deal with it, you're going to be counteracting it the rest of your life and never walking in complete wholeness and healing that God has intended for you to walk in. It may be okay for you to take some medicine for a time until those roots are dealt with in some cases. In many cases, what we see is people being healed and not having to, but wanting to and able to come off of all of their meds. We've seen people, and again, let me just caution you with this. We're not asking anybody to do this or suggesting anybody do this, but we have seen numerous people, time and time again, go and flush down all of their drugs. They have been dependent on drugs, that if you come off of some of those drugs, the likelihood of committing suicide, having huge impact on your life, huge side effects impacting you, is great. But because God has healed them and set them free, the need for that is no longer. And God's operating in their life, they've been able to walk totally free, no side effects to a large number of all different types of drugs. Most of the time, I believe it's wise to just be able to wean yourself and see, am I healed enough to wean myself? And people have weaned themselves off of all types of medicines that you're never supposed to be able to wean yourself off of, and never again dealt with the issues that were at the root. Some would want to say that the medicine healed them, but the medicines don't do that. They don't. Medically, they will tell you they don't do that. In fact, they create a greater dependence. And I'm not talking about every med in every arena. Some bring, like antibiotics can have some strengths, but they can have weaknesses because your body the bacteria and the viruses develop resistance to those. So we don't treat any medicine lightly, okay? We're going to look next, in the next one, on some of the illnesses associated with fear, affected by the endocrine system. And so you can begin to pinpoint what are the things that might be happening in my life. I'm just going to deal with a few of those. And there's a more extensive list on our website that you can find. And it's not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. It would be too long of a list. But you can begin to examine what some of those root issues are that could be at the foundation of illnesses in your life. And then learn how to walk in freedom and victory over them. Some of the illnesses associated with fear affecting our endocrine system are things like asthma, diabetes, obesity, ulcers, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, migraines, and the list goes on and on and on and on. We have a more exhaustive list, but as you look at some of those, and on our website, take a look at even more extensive list, you'll see that it's very broad and very deep. Now, as I read through some of those, maybe you have one of those and you go, I really don't deal with fear. There can be other spiritual roots, but invariably fear is a component of many facets of these things. So allow God to begin to deal with you, unpack, show you how fear is operating in your life. And what are the results of walking in freedom from fear? Well, let me tell you, what happens is that our endocrine system gets back to operating in normal, the way God created it. Some of the curses that are operating in our life can be broken instantly. When we confess and repent of our sin, the power of the enemy at operation in our life is gone, and healing can take place often instantly. Sometimes what happens is that our body begins over time to heal itself. So you deal with the root issue and overcome fear and get healthier and stronger and less anxious and less worried as you walk in that freedom and victory over that. And those hormones stop producing the negative impact in our life. I could illustrate this 100 different ways, hundreds of different people that have been healed coming through our ministry, freed of all kind of things when the root issue of fear is dealt with. All right, next session we're going to be diving into this different forms that fear takes in our lives and where ungodly fears come from. Look forward to having you back.